Hey y'all, just doing a video today on my Les George Talos. Just be upfront, this is my second time trying this video. I messed up the first round, so redoing it. So to get started, Les George Talos, it's one of the mid-tech knives. Les George really made his name in the mid-tech world with his VECP. I used to own one, fantastic knife. And this is just the follow-up. I think it's based off his, I think it was F1 model, I believe. Yeah, this is probably my favorite mid-tech out there. I've owned all of them, all the major ones, that is. The Sabenza, Omnimzon, SMF, S&G, XM18, VCP, and now this one. And I have to say, this is probably the one I like the most. And it's actually for a rather subtle reason that I'll get into in a bit. But just first thing, obviously titanium frame lock. Pretty common, you know, that's basically become almost a standard now. CTS XHP steel, Les George likes to use that stuff. Solid steel. I'm not going to go too in depth just because I think there's enough info out there. Really solid Carpenter stainless, powder steel. A lot of people compare it to D2. I disagree with that really. I think it's its own separate steel. It's got a number of, although somewhat subtle, but pretty practical differences to the D2 lineup, but still solid steel, really good all-around performer. Anyway, knife came with, I guess, early lockup. Not the earliest I've seen, but pretty early. For those that care, I actually generally prefer a little later lockup just because of the higher security in the lock. Typical bent clip, kind of just flat metal clip. Drop point blade. It came with a 20-degree per side edge. I reprofiled it to 15 just because I frankly don't see any reason to have a folder at 20 degrees per side edge angle. I'm probably going to drop it low at some point to about 10 degrees per side. Maybe put a micro bevel. But just for, you know, getting the feel for the knife, I'll put a 15-degree on it. But anyway, yeah, really solid performer from what I've seen so far. Earlier, as you can see, the remnants, I did some wood cutting on some pine. I did about 200 to 300 cuts. Knife did pretty well. The edge, it's still shaving hair with pretty much relative ease. So, that's always good. The knife was comfortable. And the thing that really made it comfortable was the beautiful rounding on the scales. And that's that little small feature that most people are going to look at like, oh, that's nice, but kind of overlook it. But that single feature just turned this knife into a whole other beast. A lot of knives, they'll just break the edges, kind of like on the Furried Mare K2 that was just released by Spyderco. Good knife, but man, they really could have rounded out that edge on the scale some more instead of just that light chamfering. This rounding makes this knife so much more comfortable than many of the other mid-techs around, especially like the Striders tend to have fairly square shoulders on the scales. And it's not something you really notice doing just light cardboard cutting and stuff like that. When you really do serious cutting, especially a lot of wood cutting and stuff like that, anything where you're bearing down on the blade, those shoulders on the handle become extremely apparent, and you really do start to notice it. And this really did a very nice job at greatly improving the ergonomics. Les did a fantastic job with these rounded shoulders. It really transformed it into just a great knife compared to most of its other brethren in the mid-tech range. Just to stick with ergos, the inside of the scales weren't rounded as much. That's got your typical, like, common just breaking the shoulder with the buffer. It wasn't a gigantic issue with me during the cutting. I did notice it, but it wasn't something where I was, you know, having major issues with it. The only ergonomic issue I had was this clip. As you can see, it's got that little lip that sticks up right there, as well as somewhat sharp corners on it, and it just, in this type of cutting with the heavy wood cutting, it just did not do well. I had to take it off, frankly, after about 20 or 30 cuts, because it would have just ruined my hand almost totally. It works well as a pocket clip, and also it doesn't, you know, in the saber grip, which is what you use for, like, what I use actually for cardboard cutting and things like that, it's really not that big of a deal. But when you go to the hammer grip, which is what I use for wood cutting and stuff, for most wood cutting, it really becomes a serious ergonomic problem, because it just bites into your hand awfully. The blade is totally solid, no issues with lock rock or anything. I did notice in cutting, especially when I went to bear down in the hammer grip like that, I did begin to push the lock over. It came out without any issues. I didn't have to, you know, pry it open or anything like that, and it returned right back to its original lockup. No issues. Seems fine. The knife is exceptionally smooth. I haven't done anything to it. I haven't messed with it. It's just the pivot works really well. Hasn't backed out yet. I did a little bit of cardboard cutting with it a couple days ago. Worked fine. Only did about 100, 150 cuts or so. Nothing, you know, nothing substantial. But it did fine. Had no issues with it. As the grips, you know, obviously it's designed for a saber grip. This jimping up here, it's your, you know, rather large style jimping. It works well for indexing and stuff. It'll keep your thumb there, but it's not as wonderful as something like, say, the Spyderco jimping that you'll get on like the Para 2. That really nice, fine, close jimping. That's you know, that's my typical favorite type of jimping. Blade shape, just a nice functional drop point. You know, pretty common. You got enough flat back here to, you know, do some nice carving and heavy cutting into it. Up here gives you a nice sweep for any kind of slices you want to do. If you do a lot of tip work for things, you know, you have perfect access to the tip. Not occluded anyway. Nice swedge up there. I did a little bit of stabbing into various cardboards, stuff like that. It thrusted fine, if that's the type of stuff you need to do. As far as blade and edge geometry, it is a flat grind, and it comes down to, I would say, somewhere around 20 thou behind the edge, which for some that's a little thick. For others, they won't even notice. It works fine for me. I mean, yes, if I'm being really nitpicky, I would have liked it to be a little thinner, but you know, it works fine from a practical standpoint. But yeah, just all around really nice little performer that I'm enjoying carrying a lot. I think it's a really nice aesthetic piece. Les does a fantastic job at a stone wash, which is generally my preferred finish on a lot of knives, especially metal pieces, just because it hides that wear really excellently. It has screw together construction, 2 standoffs. The pivot and the standoff pins, I believe, are a T10. I believe. I'm not 100% positive. I didn't really look at what it was. I just kind of went by feel. The clip screws and the thumb stud screw that holds it on are all T6. And really simple knife to take apart. It's working on phosphor bronze washers, which I think I've kind of gotten a little bit of a bad rap since the emergence of the bearing system, which I mean, bearings are great, they work well, but phosphor bronze washers can be equally as smooth with not that much effort. But yeah, just a really solid performer. The only thing I would really seriously change about this is really get a different clip. The Spyderco wire clips, even though, while I don't really like them from an aesthetic standpoint, from a functional standpoint, I have to say they do work well. Also, a lot of these new, I guess, kind of molded clips, where it's just like a solid piece of titanium or carbon fiber, and it's sculpted around, and it's nice rounded edges and stuff. Those are really solid clips. I hope we see more of those. And that would really turn this into a whole new knife, and just, because this is just the main serious drawback in cutting. Everything else is minor in my opinion. I really enjoy this knife. I think Les did a fantastic job with the design. I think it's aesthetically pleasing. I think it looks beautiful. It cuts fine. It's not really a great paring knife, but for regular, you know, around the day cutting, especially for, you know, a suburban knife user or something, it will work well. You know, the tie frame lock, while it's been proven that the tie frame lock is not the umpteenth most secure lock, from a practical standpoint, it'll work fine for most people. And again, this knife is extremely easy to maintenance and clean. Yeah, guys, that's my thoughts. Bottom line, really solid knife. Beautiful design by Les. Great execution. Going to be a joy to carry. And this is a bit of a preliminary use video. If anything comes up, I'll obviously make another video saying, hey, this didn't work well. But I don't really expect that to happen. I expect me to enjoy it as much, if not more, than I enjoyed the VECP I used to have. And yeah, just a nice all-around tie frame lock. This is my first video, you guys, so if I mess anything up, or you know, if there's anything I can improve on and stuff like that, I would love those comments. I'd like to improve stuff. Just if any constructive criticism you guys may have, I welcome it. And any other comments or questions or thoughts you guys might have, please put them in the comments. I'll try and get to them. Thanks, guys. Have a good day.